When you take off cruising, you'll need to identify some emergency contacts for your EPIRB, float plans, and even in case of a medical emergency. Who is the right person? And do you need more than one person? Hi there, I'm Carolyn Sherlock, and on this episode of the Boat Galley Podcast, I'll share everything you must consider when choosing your best emergency contact. Or contacts. Your life could depend on making the right decision. Now, this episode of the Boat Galley Podcast is sponsored by Fast Seas, budget-friendly weather routing and passage planning for cruisers. Buy a cruiser. Plan your next passage using fastseas.com. Whether you're after speed or comfort, Fast Seas will find the optimum route to your destination. Use coupon code BG20 for an exclusive 10% discount. Fast Seas, making weather routing simple. Okay, what should you know in choosing your emergency contact when you're out boating or having other adventures? On land, it's pretty simple. Generally your spouse or partner, perhaps a parent or adult child, maybe a best friend. If you're cruising or traveling, it gets more complicated, yet picking the right person is critical. You need an emergency contact when you register your EPIRB. This is the person who will be contacted if your EPIRB goes off, and who should know if you're on passage and where, along with all the pertinent details of your boat, your experience, and your safety gear. You'll need someone to give your float plans to, again, with knowledge of where your plans are and what your preparation is. And then you need an emergency contact on your ID, who also knows your medical history. Now, just a side note, I wear a road ID bracelet, and there's a link to these on the show notes. I don't get anything out of giving you this link or anything, but it is a fantastic way to always have ID on you. Now, those three emergency contacts might not all be the same person, and they might not all be relatives. Okay, let's talk about the general traits of these people. First, they need to be responsible. They need to be generally available. They need to be calm in an emergency. The last thing you need is a drama queen. They have to be not prone to overreacting. They have to be knowledgeable about who to contact, the appropriate search and rescue, family, and medical personnel. And they need to have good communications capabilities as appropriate for the area. In general, it means a cell phone with plenty of minutes and good coverage. Basically, you want someone who will take appropriate action without overreacting or failing to respond. And you have to give them information as to your boat, your safety gear, your experience, your family, any emergency evacuation assurance or programs you have, your medical conditions, and so on. Now, always ask someone before naming them as your emergency contact. Let's start by talking about choosing an emergency contact for your EPIRB. Your EPIRB registration is valid for 2 years, and it requires you to name 2 emergency contacts. Now, these contacts should be people who are not on the boat and not living together. If they're living together, the chances are good that if one is unavailable due to being on vacation and having no cell coverage, the other one will be also. If your EPIRB goes off, these will be the first people called by the search and rescue authorities. The emergency contact will need to provide information about where your boat is currently headed, your trip plans, your safety gear and communications gear on board, as well as any problems you may have reported prior to the EPIRB being set off. The emergency contact will also be responsible for notifying your family and friends as to what is happening. So make sure they know who you would want to be contacted and at what point in the search and rescue. My suggestion is to have a former cruiser as your EPIRB contact, as they will hopefully be in one location to be contacted and also understand the information needed about your boat and understand what the search and rescue authorities are saying. While you can amend your registration to name new emergency contacts, most of us don't think to do it until we re-register. So it's good to name someone who you think will be available for the whole 2-year program. People who travel a lot themselves or have a lot of change in their lives are not good contacts. Choosing now who to give your float plan to. Before any trip, you should give a float plan to someone who will alert search and rescue if you don't report at an agreed upon time. Now, I've got some other things that I've written in podcast about float plans. You can take a look at those. There's links in the show notes. But your float plan contact is basically a one-time commitment, although you might use the same person several times. The responsibility lasts only as long as the present leg of the voyage. Now, another local cruiser who is not heading out while you're at sea is ideal. Since you haven't set off an EPIRB, this person will be responsible for initiating search and rescue operations if conditions seem to warrant it. You need someone who understands the trip you're making, is familiar with the area, watches the weather in the area to know if there's been a nasty squall or particularly benign conditions, knows and will try all possible ways to contact you before sounding an alarm, and who knows what search and rescue authorities to contact if needed, as well as other resources in the cruising community. You don't want someone who's just watching an inReach tracker with instructions to call for help if it stops transmitting. It may just be that someone has forgotten to charge it. There has to be a certain level of judgment, and that is usually better provided by another cruiser rather than a family member or a friend who has no knowledge of passage making. Since the float plan document has detailed information about your boat, the trip, and the people aboard, you shouldn't have to provide additional information. Now let's talk about choosing your emergency contact for medical emergencies. Your ID should always specify your medical contact. Additionally, I wear this Road ID bracelet that allows a first responder to get my medical information online. Now, while the boat has EPIRB and float plan contacts that cover everyone on board, each individual should have a medical contact. And if another member of the crew is specified as the primary medical contact, in other words, like a spouse, you should also specify a secondary one who is not aboard. In addition to knowing your medical history, your medical contact needs information on your medical insurance or other coverage you may have, and any medical evacuation coverage. They should have a copy of your living will and know who are authorized decision makers pursuant to it. They need contact information for your next of kin. Update the information provided to your medical contact at least once a year. I do it on my birthday to make it easy to remember. And do it again if you have any major new conditions. The bottom line, we never want to think about anything bad happen, but the best outcomes happen when people are prepared. Think carefully about your emergency contacts when choosing them, and make sure that they have the information that could make a difference if a problem arises. Think of it as similar to your life raft. We hope to never use it. We hope it's money and time wasted. But should we ever need it, we want it to be the best possible. Thanks for listening to the Boat Galley podcast today. If you've found it useful, be sure that you're subscribed in your favorite podcast app. And please, tell your friends about it. And if you feel like it, leave us a review. We love seeing those 5 stars.